I was a court reporter.
And which trial were you the court reporter?
I was only there for the first trial.
And when did you get there?
In the spring before the trial started.
Okay. So 1945?
Yeah, I guess that was 45.
Right. And how did you get it? How did you land that job?
Well, I'd been a court reporter most of the war.
Right.
I was, when the United States first got into the war, they needed a court reporter, and I was assigned out of the British Army to be their court reporter. I was on the staff of the U.S. Chief of Counsel.
So who would have been your boss?
Robert Jackson.
Ah. Did your paths ever cross with Justice Jackson's?
Yes, once in a while. I was rather surprised that, as young as we all were, that we were very much aware of the historic nature of the trial, and we took it very seriously. We worked as teams. An interpreter and a reporter were assigned to an interrogator. And I worked with the same interpreter all the time. His name escapes me at the moment, but if I didn't want to know, I could tell you. But I read recently that he was considered to be the chief interpreter.
Was his name Richard Sonnenfeld?
Right.
This is amazing, because I've spent probably 10 hours with Richard Sonnenfeld interviewing him for the Jackson Center.
Oh, well, I was so interested. I'd often thought about him over the years, and I don't remember that we socialized a great deal, but we were good friends, and he and I did most of the interrogations. The most interesting part was the pre-trial interrogations before the trial started, because during the trial, as they do in all trials, they only presented enough evidence to convict. But in the pre-trial interrogations, they got everything, because they didn't know what they were going to use. So it was a lot more interesting than the actual trial itself. And Richard and I worked principally with Goring, because Goring, for some reason, was quite attached to our team, and in fact refused to testify unless we were the team that recorded it.
The interrogator most of the time was that Harlan?
Oh, it was a number of different. They were usually it was usually a colonel, a legal officer in the army, and I don't recall one being there more than another. But all the interrogations are on file in Washington. On every interrogation is the name of the interpreter and the reporter and the interrogator. I stayed through the first trial, and then I had already served over 8 years in the army, and I'd served 6 months longer than I had to, and my family was urging me to come home because the Germans were not very friendly to us at Nuremberg. They did sweet little things like stringing wires across the highway at night so that anybody driving a Jeep would be decapitated. And you only have to tell that story, those stories once or twice at home, and your family wants you to get out of it.
So where was home?
In England, near London.
Near London. How did you end up in the United States?
I came over here to work and married one of my former bosses, when I was a court reporter with the 8th and 9th Air Forces. When we got there in May, before the trial started, I think it was May, it was very hot weather anyway, and there were 55,000 people buried in the ruins. It was very smelly in Nuremberg.
When you walked into the courtroom and saw Hermann Goering for the first time, what did you think?
Well, I'd been working with him for months.
Oh, that's true, yeah. But even the first time when you walked in and saw him?
I was very embarrassed because he regarded Richard and I as friends, and although we were never allowed to speak with him, of course, it was, strictly, we were never allowed even to greet each other, but when I walked in, I was terribly embarrassed because they were sitting across the room from the judges, and I was one of the first reporters. I got through the first session to report, and as I walked in, Goering waved cheerily at me as I came in, and of course, when you're 27, you're very embarrassed to have the defendant wave at you.
Oh my God.
Naturally, I've given a lot of talks about Nuremberg in high schools, and my favorite story, by the way, is that I was talking in one of the high schools here, and naturally I was saying during the war so-and-so and after the war, and finally one student put his hand up and said, "Excuse me, but when you say the war, what war are you talking about?" and before I could reply, one of the other students said, "The Spanish-American War, of